The lights on Galactic Research Station Harmony's Edge flickered for the third time that hour. Somewhere deep in the station's belly, an alarm was screaming. Lieutenant Yuna Kim wiped the sweat from her forehead and crawled deeper into the maintenance shaft. She had been awake for 37 hours now. Her eyes burned, her muscles ached. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for another wire. But she could not stop. Not yet, not until the station was safe. Harmony's Edge was home to over 200 beings from 12 different species. It floated in the cold darkness of space, orbiting a dying red star that gave off barely enough light to see. The station was old. The station was tired. And tonight, the station had decided to break. It started with the cooling systems. Then the oxygen filters began to fail. Then the backup power went offline. One problem led to another. Like dominoes falling in a line that never seemed to end. Yuna was the only human engineer on the station. She was also the only engineer who had answered the emergency call. The others were either sleeping, sick, or simply did not care enough to leave their warm beds, so Yuna worked alone. She crawled through tubes that were too small for her body. She squeezed past pipes that dripped strange fluids onto her uniform. She burned her fingers on overheated circuits and cut her palms on sharp metal edges. But she kept going. The station needed her. The people on it needed her. And Yuna Kim had never been very good at saying no. Back in the main control room, the other species watched her work through the security cameras. They saw the small human woman drag herself through impossible spaces. They saw her fix things that 3 engineers had declared unfixable. They saw her refuse to stop, refuse to rest, refuse to give up. The Valori delegation watched with particular interest. Commander Voss stood with her arms crossed, her silver-blue fur shifting to colors that showed her mood. Right now, the fur was a suspicious yellow. "Humans are strange," she said to no one in particular. "Why does she push herself so hard? There is no honor in dying from exhaustion." Her aide, a young male named Ren, shrugged his narrow shoulders. "Perhaps she does not know how to stop. Then she is a fool." But Voss kept watching. There was something about the human that she could not look away from. Something in the way Yuna moved. The way she worked. The way she seemed to pour her entire self into every task. It was foolish. Yes, but it was also impressive. Voss would never admit that out loud. 3 decks below, hidden in a storage closet, a small Valori cub was crying. Her name was Tika, and she was only 6 years old. She had gotten separated from her mother during the evacuation drills. The alarms had been so loud, the lights had been so bright, everyone had been running and shouting, and Tika had been pushed and pulled until suddenly she was alone. She had tried to find her way back. But the station was a maze of corridors that all looked the same. Every door led to another hallway. Every hallway led to another door, and everywhere she went, there were strangers who did not see her, did not hear her, did not stop to help. So Tika had hidden. She had found a small, dark space behind some boxes, and she had curled up into a ball. And she had cried until no more tears would come. Now she was just tired. Tired, and scared, and cold. The Valori came from an ice world, but that did not mean they liked being cold. Their fur kept them warm, but only when they felt safe. When a Valori was scared, their fur did not work as well. The cold crept in through the fear. Tika was very scared, so Tika was very cold. She did not know how long she stayed in that closet. Time moved strangely when you were alone and afraid. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. All Tika knew was that eventually, the alarms stopped. The silence was almost worse. Slowly, carefully, the cub crawled out of her hiding spot. The hallway outside was empty. The lights had stopped flickering. Everything seemed calm now, but Tika did not trust it. She began to walk. Her small paws made no sound on the metal floor. She kept close to the walls, ready to hide again if anyone appeared. But the corridors remained empty. Everyone was either in their quarters or in the control room. No one was wandering the halls at this hour. No one except Tika, and no one except the human. Yuna had finally finished her work. The last system was online. The last alarm was silent. The station was safe. But Yuna could barely stand. She needed to get back to her quarters. She needed to sleep. But her quarters were on deck 4. And she was on deck 7. And the distance between them seemed impossible. The observation lounge was closer. It was just around the corner. It had heated floor panels and soft lighting, and no one ever went there at this hour. Yuna decided that the floor would do. She stumbled into the lounge and did not even make it to the bench. Her legs simply stopped working. She fell to her knees, then to her side, then flat on her back. The heated floor felt wonderful against her aching body. She should get up. She should at least find a pillow. She should tell someone where she was. But her eyes were already closing. Her thoughts were already fading. And within seconds, Lieutenant Yuna Kim was deeply, completely asleep. She did not hear the door open a few minutes later. She did not see the small silver-blue figure that crept into the room. She did not feel the golden eyes that watched her from the shadows. Tika had found the observation lounge by accident. She had been looking for somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, somewhere she could hide until morning came and she could find her mother. She had not expected to find a human. The cub had seen humans before, but always from a distance. Her mother did not like humans. Her mother said they were too loud, too emotional, too attached to things that did not matter. Her mother said that humans formed bonds too quickly and too deeply, and that this made them dangerous. But this human did not look dangerous. This human looked tired. This human looked small. This human looked almost as lost as Tika felt. The cub moved closer. The human's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Her face was relaxed in sleep, younger and softer than it had been while she worked. There was a smear of grease on her cheek and a burn mark on her hand. She looked like she had been through a war. Tika moved closer still, and then she felt it. Warmth. Not the weak warmth of the station's heating systems. Not the distant warmth of the red star outside. This was something different. Something alive. Something that seemed to reach out and wrap around the cub like a blanket. Tika had never felt anything like it. She knew she should leave. She knew her mother would be angry. She knew that touching a sleeping human was probably against some rule. But Tika was so cold, and the human was so warm. Before she could stop herself, the cub lay down beside the human. She pressed her small body against Yuna's side, feeling the heat sink into her fur, into her skin, into her bones. The human's arm shifted in sleep, falling gently across the cub's back. Tika made a sound she had not made in months. A low, rumbling purr that came from somewhere deep in her chest. A sound of safety. A sound of peace. A sound of finally being warm. The cub closed her golden eyes. For the first time since her father died, Tika slept without nightmares. The galaxy was full of strange and wonderful things. There were planets made entirely of diamond. There were stars that sang in frequencies only certain species could hear. There were creatures that lived for thousands of years, and creatures that lived for only a single day. But of all the strange things in the galaxy, humans were perhaps the strangest. They came from a small blue planet on the edge of a quiet spiral arm. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom. By all logic, they should have died out long ago. They should have been eaten by predators, or killed by disease, or destroyed by their own foolishness. Instead, they had spread across the stars. The galactic community had spent centuries trying to understand humans. They had studied their biology, their psychology, their history, their culture. They had written thousands of reports and papers and books. And still, humans remained a mystery. One thing everyone agreed on, however, was that humans were warm. Most species in the galaxy maintained body temperatures between 25 and 30 degrees. This was considered normal. This was considered healthy. This was considered proper. Humans burned at 37 degrees. To most species, touching a human felt like touching a heating unit. It was uncomfortable. It was strange. Some species even found it medically dangerous. A prolonged hug from a human could raise a Krillion's body temperature to unsafe levels. A handshake could leave a Florinian with a mild burn. Humans did not seem to understand this. They touched everything and everyone. They hugged and held hands and patted backs and ruffled hair. They did not seem to realize that their warmth was unusual. To them, it was simply normal. But to the Valori, human warmth was something else entirely. The Valori came from a world of ice and snow. Their planet orbited far from its sun, receiving only a fraction of the light and heat that Earth enjoyed. The Valori had evolved to survive in this cold. Their fur was thick and insulating. Their blood ran slow to conserve energy. Their hearts beat only 20 times per minute, but evolution could only do so much. The Valori were always cold. It was a fact of their existence. They wore heated clothing and lived in heated buildings and slept in heated beds. But the cold was always there, waiting just beneath the surface. A Valori never truly felt warm. They simply felt less cold, until they touched a human. This was not something the Valori talked about. It was considered shameful, like an addiction or a weakness. Some Valori had been known to seek out humans just to stand near them, just to feel that incredible heat radiating from their skin. These Valori were looked down upon. They were called names. They were told that they were betraying their species. Commander Voss had always agreed with this view. She had always believed that the Valori were strong, that they did not need the warmth of lesser species, that they could survive on their own just as they always had. But that was before her daughter stopped sleeping. Tika had been a happy child once. She had laughed and played, and caused trouble like any normal cub. Her fur had been bright with joy, shifting through colors like a rainbow in motion. She had been the light of her parents' lives. Then her father died. It had been an accident, a shuttle malfunction. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. There was no warning, no goodbye, no chance to say the things that needed to be said. He was simply erased from the universe, leaving behind only memories and grief. Tika had not cried at the funeral. She had not cried when they packed up their home. She had not cried when they left their planet behind and came to this station in the middle of nowhere. She had simply gone quiet. The healers said it was normal. They said that cubs processed grief differently. They said that Tika would speak when she was ready, that she would cry when she was ready, that she would heal when she was ready. But months passed, and Tika did not heal. She stopped eating properly. She stopped playing with other cubs. She stopped speaking entirely. And every night, without fail, she woke up screaming from nightmares she refused to describe. Voss had tried everything. She had hired the best healers, the best counselors, the best specialists the galaxy could offer. She had held her daughter through every nightmare, whispered comfort through every silent day, tried everything she could think of to reach the child who used to be so full of life. Nothing worked. Voss began to wonder if anything ever would, and now her daughter was missing. The commander stood in the control room, watching the security feeds, waiting for any sign of her child. The station had been searched twice already. Every deck, every room, every closet and corridor, and maintenance shaft. But Tika was small, and Tika was good at hiding. And Tika did not want to be found. Voss's fur shifted through colors of fear and anger and helpless despair. She was a commander. She had led armies into battle. She had faced enemies that would make most species run in terror. But she had never felt as powerless as she did right now. Where was her daughter? The answer was simpler than she could have imagined. In the observation lounge, Tika slept peacefully against the human's side. The cub's fur had shifted to a soft lavender, a color of contentment that Voss had not seen in months. Her breathing was slow and steady. Her small face was relaxed. She looked, for the first time, in a very long time, like a child who was not afraid. The human's body temperature had not changed all night. 37 degrees, steady as a star. Her heat wrapped around the cub like a blanket, seeping through fur and skin and muscle to warm the cold that had lived in Tika's bones for so long. Yuna did not wake. She was too exhausted, too deeply asleep to notice the small body pressed against her side. But some part of her knew that something was there. Some instinct, buried deep in human DNA, recognized a child in need. Her arms stayed draped over the cub's back. Her body stayed still and warm and safe. Even in sleep, the human protected the creature that had come to her for comfort. This was what humans did. This was what humans had always done. They found broken things and tried to fix them. They found cold things and tried to warm them. They found lonely things and refused to let them stay alone. It was foolish. It was illogical. It was everything the Valori had been taught to look down upon. But as the station's artificial night continued, as the red star outside cast its dim light through the observation windows, as the human and the cub slept side by side on the heated floor, something was happening that no one had planned. Tika was healing. Not completely, not all at once. The grief was still there. The loss was still there. The hole in her heart where her father used to be was still there. But for the first time in months, the cold had retreated. For the first time in months, the nightmares had not come. For the first time in months, Tika felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be okay again. All because a tired human had fallen asleep on the floor. All because a scared cub had been brave enough to ask for warmth. The galaxy was full of strange and wonderful things. But perhaps the strangest and most wonderful thing of all was this: that sometimes, the biggest problems could be solved by the smallest acts of kindness. Tika purred in her sleep, pressing closer to the human's warmth. Morning was still hours away. But for the first time in a long time, Tika was not afraid of the dark. Commander Voss had not slept in 20 hours. She stood in the security center, surrounded by screens that showed every corner of the station. Her fur had stopped changing colors hours ago. It had settled into a dull gray, the color of exhaustion, the color of a Valori who had nothing left to feel. Her daughter was somewhere on this station. Her daughter was alone and scared and probably cold. And Voss could not find her. "We have searched every deck twice," said Ren, her aide. He looked almost as tired as she did. "Every room, every storage area, every maintenance space. There is nowhere left to look." "Then search again. Commander, with respect, the cub does not want to be found. She is small and clever. She could be hiding in a space too small for our scanners to detect." Voss turned on him, her fur flashing to angry red. "She is 6 years old. She is scared. She is alone. And you want me to simply wait?" Ren lowered his eyes. "I want you to consider other options." "What options? What else can we do?" Before Ren could answer, the door to the security center opened. A human walked in. Tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a calm face. His name tag identified him as Do-Won Park, Chief of Security. "Commander Voss," he said, bowing slightly in the human way. "I heard about your daughter. I'm very sorry." Voss did not respond. She did not trust herself to speak to a human right now, not when her emotions were so raw, so close to the surface. She might say something she would regret. Do-Won did not seem offended by her silence. He simply walked to one of the control panels and began typing commands. "May I?" he asked, gesturing at the screens. Voss nodded stiffly. The human's fingers moved quickly over the controls. Screens flickered and changed, showing different views, different data, different information. Voss watched without really seeing. She was too tired to process what he was doing. Then Do-Won stopped. "There," he said, pointing at one of the screens. "Deck 7, Observation Lounge." Voss looked. The screen showed a dimly lit room with large windows that looked out into space. The floor was covered with heating panels. And on that floor, barely visible in the low light, were two shapes. One was human. Small, female, with dark hair spread across the floor like a spill of ink. She lay on her back. One arm stretched out to the side. The other shape was pressed against her. Small, silver blue, unmistakably Valori. "Tika," Voss breathed. "It appears your daughter found Lieutenant Kim," said Do-Won. "The lieutenant has been asleep for approximately 4 hours. She worked through the entire crisis without rest. I suspect she simply collapsed where she stood." "Oh." Voss stared at the screen. Her daughter was sleeping. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully. without thrashing, without crying, without the nightmares that had haunted her for months. Her daughter's fur was lavender, a color Voss had not seen since before the accident, and she was using a human as a pillow. "This is unacceptable," Voss said, but her voice was weak. Dowan raised an eyebrow. "Unacceptable how? Your daughter is safe. She is warm. She is sleeping peacefully. What part of that is unacceptable? She is touching a human." "Yes. And the human is keeping her warm." Dowan's voice was gentle but firm. "Commander, I understand that your species has certain beliefs about humans. I understand that you believe contact with us is somehow shameful. But look at your daughter. Really look at her. When was the last time she slept like that?" Voss did not answer. She could not answer, because the truth was that she could not remember. The truth was that Tika had not slept peacefully since the night her father died. The truth was that this human, this stranger, had given her daughter something that Voss herself could not provide. It should have made her angry. It should have made her jealous. Instead, it just made her sad. "I need to go to her," Voss said. "Of course." Dowan nodded to the guards by the door. "I will accompany you, if you permit. Lieutenant Kim is one of my officers. I would like to make sure she is not disturbed unnecessarily." Voss wanted to refuse. She wanted to storm into that room alone, to grab her daughter and carry her away from the human, to pretend that none of this had ever happened. But something stopped her, some small voice in the back of her mind that said, "Wait." That said, "Think." That said, "Maybe there is more to this than you understand." "Very well," she said finally. "You may come." They walked in silence through the empty corridors. The station was quiet now. The crisis was over. Most of the crew had returned to their quarters to rest. Only the essential personnel remained on duty, and even they were operating with minimal staff. Voss's fur began to shift again as they walked. Gray to yellow to orange to red and back to gray. Her emotions were a storm inside her. Too many feelings fighting for control. Fear for her daughter, anger at herself for losing her, confusion about what she had seen on the screen, and underneath it all, a small, quiet hope that she was afraid to name. They reached Deck 7. The observation lounge was at the end of the corridor, its doors sealed against the emptiness of space beyond the windows. Voss paused outside, gathering herself. "Commander," Dowan said quietly, "may I offer some advice?" Voss looked at him. "What?" "Your daughter chose to be there. She found that room, she found that human, and she chose to stay. Whatever happens next, please remember that. She is not a prisoner. She is not being held against her will. She made a choice, and that choice brought her peace. She is 6 years old. She does not know what is best for her. Perhaps," Dowan smiled slightly, "or perhaps 6-year-olds know more than we give them credit for. They have not yet learned to ignore what their hearts tell them." Voss did not know how to respond to that. So she simply turned to the door and pressed the control panel. The doors slid open. The observation lounge was warm and dim. The heating panels in the floor gave off a gentle glow. The windows showed the endless darkness of space, broken only by the distant light of stars too far away to name. And on the floor, exactly as the screen had shown, were the human and the cub. Yuna had not moved since falling asleep. Her body was completely relaxed, her breathing slow and deep. There were dark circles under her eyes and smudges of grease on her face. Her uniform was wrinkled and stained. She looked like someone who had worked herself to the very edge of her limits. Tika was curled against her side like she had always been there. The cub's small body rose and fell with each breath. Her paws were tucked under her chin. Her tail was wrapped around the human's arm. She looked smaller than Voss remembered, and somehow also more complete. Voss stepped forward. Her boot made a soft sound on the floor. Tika's ears twitched. Her golden eyes opened, blinking slowly in the dim light. She looked up at her mother, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. "Tika," Voss said. Her voice was softer than she intended. "Come here." The cub did not move. "Tika, it is time to go. Come to me." Still, the cub did not move. But something changed in her eyes. Something that had been broken began to shift. And when she spoke, her voice was small but clear. No. It was the first word Tika had spoken in 3 weeks. Voss felt her heart stop. The word hung in the air like smoke after a fire. No. Such a small word. Such a simple word. Just 2 letters. 1 syllable. Barely enough sound to fill the space between heartbeats. But in that moment, in that dim and quiet room, it was the loudest thing Voss had ever heard. Her daughter had spoken. After 3 weeks of silence, after months of nightmares and grief and loss, her daughter had finally spoken. And the first word she had chosen to say was, no. Voss did not know whether to laugh or cry. Tika, she said again, and her voice cracked on the name. Please, come to me. But Tika shook her head. The cub pressed closer to the sleeping human, her small paws gripping the fabric of Yuna's uniform. Her fur shifted from lavender to orange, the color of stubbornness, the color of a Valori who had made up her mind and refused to change it. No, Tika said again. Warm here. Safe here. Not leaving. Voss took a step forward. Behind her, the 2 Valori guards shifted, ready to move on her command. Dowan stood to the side, watching with careful eyes. Tika, you cannot stay here. This is not appropriate. You do not belong with a human. Why not? The question stopped Voss cold. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Why not? Because it was against tradition? Because other Valori would judge them? Because Voss herself had always been taught that humans were lesser, that their warmth was a weakness, that depending on them was shameful? None of those reasons seemed good enough anymore. Not when her daughter was looking at her with those golden eyes. Not when her daughter was finally speaking after weeks of silence. Not when her daughter was asking a question that Voss did not know how to answer. Because... Voss started, then stopped. Because I am your mother. Because I am supposed to keep you warm. Because that is my job, not hers. You're cold, Tika said simply. She's warm. The words hit Voss like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her fur flashing through colors too fast to name. Pain, shame, anger, grief, all of it mixed together into something that hurt worse than anything she had ever felt. I have tried, Voss whispered. I have tried so hard to help you. I have held you through every nightmare. I have stayed awake for days, trying to comfort you. I have done everything I know how to do. And you say I am cold? Tika's eyes softened. She was young, but she was not stupid. She could see that her words had wounded her mother. But she could not take them back, because they were true. Not your fault, Tika said quietly. You can't help being cold. But she's different. She's warm inside. All the way through. And when I'm next to her, I forget about being cold. I forget about being scared. I forget about the bad dreams. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I forget that father is gone. Voss's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the heated floor, her elegant composure finally breaking. Tears that she had held back for months began to fall, leaving wet trails through the fur on her face. Oh, my little one, she breathed. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. It was then that the human woke up. Yuna's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light. For a moment, she was confused. She did not remember where she was. She did not remember how she had gotten here. She only knew that she was very tired, and that something warm and soft was pressed against her side. Then she saw the Valori. A tall female with silver-blue fur was kneeling on the floor a few feet away, crying. 2 guards stood behind her, looking uncomfortable. A human male stood to the side, his expression calm but watchful, and pressed against Yuna's side was a small cub with golden eyes and fur that was slowly shifting from orange to a worried purple. Yuna did not move. She did not speak. She simply looked at the crying Valori and understood, somehow, that this was the cub's mother. She found me, Yuna said quietly. Her voice was rough from sleep. She was scared and cold, and she found me. Voss looked up, Her eyes were red from tears, her fur still shifting through colors of grief. She is my daughter. I know. Yuna's arm stayed where it was, draped protectively over the cub's back. And she's safe. She's warm. She's sleeping peacefully for what I think is the first time in a long while. A pause. I'm not going to take that from her. She belongs with me. Yes, she does. Yuna's voice was gentle but firm. But right now, she needs this. Whatever this is, and if you try to force her to leave before she's ready, you might break something that can't be fixed. Voss stared at the human. This small, soft, impossibly warm creature who had worked herself to exhaustion for a station full of species that barely tolerated her. Who was now lying on the floor with a stranger's child pressed against her side, who was defying a Valori commander without raising her voice or showing any fear. Who do you think you are? Voss asked. What gives you the right to tell me what my daughter needs? I'm nobody, Yuna said simply. I'm just an engineer who was too tired to make it back to my quarters. I didn't ask for your daughter to find me. I didn't ask for any of this. But she did find me, and she chose to stay, and I'm not going to push her away. The guards shifted again, their hands moving toward their weapons. Dowan stepped forward, placing himself between them and the human on the floor. Commander, he said calmly, I think we all need to take a breath here. No one is trying to take your daughter from you. No one is threatening your authority. Lieutenant Kim is simply asking for some time. Time for the cub to wake up naturally. Time for all of us to think about what's really happening here. What is really happening here? Voss demanded. My daughter has been missing for hours. I find her sleeping on a human. She refuses to come to me. She says I am cold. What am I supposed to think? Maybe, Dowan said gently. You're supposed to think about why she needed to find warmth somewhere else. And maybe you're supposed to wonder if there's a way for you to give her what she needs. Voss looked at him, then at the human on the floor, then at her daughter. Tika was watching her with those golden eyes, waiting, hoping, afraid. The cub's fur was shifting through colors, too many to name, too fast to follow. And underneath all those colors, Voss could see something she had not seen in months. Hope. Her daughter had hope again. This impossible human, this stranger who meant nothing to them, had given Tika something that all the healers and counselors and specialists could not provide. She had given her a reason to believe that things could be okay again. Voss's fur slowly settled into a color she had not felt in a long time. A soft, aching blue. The color of sadness, yes, but also the color of acceptance. The color of a Valori who was finally letting go of her pride. There is room, Yuna said softly, watching the commander's face. If you want, Voss blinked. What? The floor. There's room. Yuna shifted slightly, creating space on her other side. I run hot enough for 2. 3. Actually, if you wanted to find out what your daughter is talking about, it was an impossible offer. It was inappropriate. It was against everything Voss had ever been taught. A commander of the Valori, lying on the floor with a human like some kind of desperate child seeking warmth. But Tika was looking at her. Tika's fur was shifting to a hopeful green, and Tika was speaking again, after weeks of silence, saying words that Voss had been waiting to hear for so long. Please, mother, stay with us, just for a little while. Voss looked at her daughter. She looked at the human. She looked at the guards, and at Dowan, and at the vast darkness of space outside the windows. Then, slowly, she lay down on the floor beside the human. The warmth hit her immediately. It was like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime of shadow. It sank through her fur, through her skin, through her muscles and bones until it reached the cold place in her heart that had been frozen since her husband died. Voss closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she did not feel alone. Station Master Unji Cho had seen many strange things in her career. She had been present at first contact with 3 different species. She had negotiated peace treaties between empires that had been at war for 1,000 years. She had survived plagues, pirates, and one very memorable incident involving a malfunctioning translator and a deeply offended ambassador who thought she had insulted his mother. But she had never seen anything quite like this. The observation lounge was quiet when she arrived at 6 in the morning. The lights were dim. The heating panels gave off their gentle warmth. The windows showed the endless stars outside, cold and distant and beautiful. And on the floor, in a pile that should have been impossible, were 3 sleeping figures. Lieutenant Yuna Kim lay in the center. She was still wearing her dirty uniform, still had grease on her face, still looked like someone who had worked for 2 days without rest. But her expression was peaceful. Her breathing was slow and steady, and her body was doing what human bodies did best. It was keeping everyone warm. On Yuna's right side, curled up like she had always been there, was the Valori cub. Tika's fur was a soft lavender, the color of contentment, the color of peace. Her small paws were tucked under her chin. Her tail was wrapped around the human's arm. She was smiling in her sleep. And on Yuna's left side, pressed against the human with an awkwardness that spoke of someone who had never done this before, was Commander Voss herself, the proud Valori commander, the leader of delegations, the warrior who had faced enemies that would make most species run in terror. She was lying on the floor of an observation lounge, using a human as a pillow, her fur matching her daughter's lavender for the first time in months. Yunji stood in the doorway and simply stared. Behind her, Do-won appeared. He had stayed awake through the night, watching over the unlikely group, making sure no one disturbed them. His eyes were tired, but his smile was genuine. "I know," he said quietly. "I had the same reaction. How long have they been like that?" "About 4 hours, for the commander. The cub has been there since around midnight." Yunji shook her head slowly. "I never thought I would see a Valori commander cuddling with a human." "Neither did she, I think." Do-won paused. "But her daughter asked her to stay. And Commander Voss loves her daughter more than she loves her pride." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the 3 figures sleep. The station hummed quietly around them. The stars turned slowly outside the windows. The universe continued on its endless journey through time and space. But in this small room, something had changed. Something small and quiet and important. Something that would ripple outward in ways that no one could predict. "Should we wake them?" Unji asked. "No." Do-won smiled. "Let them sleep. Morning will come soon enough." And it did. The station's lights began to brighten at 7, simulating the sunrise that the crew would never see in the darkness of space. The observation lounge grew lighter by degrees, the shadows slowly retreating to the corners of the room. Yuna was the first to wake. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to remember where she was. Then she felt the weight on either side of her body and looked down. A Valori cub was sleeping against her right side. A Valori commander was sleeping against her left side. Both of them were purring softly, a sound that Yuna had never heard before, but somehow understood. She did not move. She did not want to disturb them. She simply lay there, feeling their weight against her body, feeling their cold slowly warming against her skin, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Connection. Yuna had always been alone. She had grown up an only child. She had lost her parents young. She had thrown herself into her work because it was easier than trying to form relationships that might hurt her. She had told herself that she did not need anyone, that she was fine on her own, that loneliness was simply the price of independence. But lying here, with 2 strangers pressed against her sides, she realized that she had been wrong. Everyone needed someone. Everyone needed warmth. Everyone needed to know that they were not alone in the vast coldness of the universe. Humans knew this. It was in their blood, in their bones, in the very core of their being. They reached out. They connected. They formed bonds with everything and everyone, regardless of species, regardless of logic, regardless of what anyone else thought. It was what made humans dangerous, the Valori said. But maybe, Yuna thought, it was also what made them necessary. Tika woke next. The cub's golden eyes blinked open, focusing slowly on the human's face above her. For a moment, she looked confused. Then she remembered where she was, and why, and her fur shifted to a happy pink. "Good morning," Yuna said softly. Tika smiled. It was the first real smile the cub had shown in months. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Yes." Tika's voice was small but clear. "No bad dreams. First time in forever." Yuna felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I'm glad." On her other side, Voss was beginning to stir. The commander's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment, she looked completely lost. Then she realized where she was, and who she was with, and her fur flashed through several colors before settling on an embarrassed pink. "I cannot believe I did this," Voss muttered. "Neither can I," said a voice from the doorway. They all looked up. Unji stood there with a tray of tea and a stack of blankets. Dowan stood beside her, holding a pot of something that smelled like breakfast. "Station master," Voss said, trying to sit up with dignity and failing completely. "This is not what it looks like." 141. "Really?" Unji raised an eyebrow. "Because it looks like you spent the night cuddling with my chief engineer. Which, I have to say, was not on my list of expected events for this week." Voss's fur turned a deeper shade of pink. "I was conducting research into human thermal properties." Unji and Dowan exchanged a look. Then, at the same time, they both started laughing. It was not mocking laughter. It was the laughter of people who had seen something unexpected and wonderful, and did not quite know how to process it. It was the laughter of relief and surprise and joy, all mixed together. And after a moment, Yuna started laughing too. Then Tika. And finally, reluctantly, even Voss allowed herself a small smile. "Breakfast?" Unji offered, setting down the tray. They ate together on the floor of the observation lounge, the three unlikely companions, and the two humans who had found them. The tea was hot and sweet. The food was simple but good. The conversation was awkward at first, but it grew easier as the minutes passed. Tika talked more than she had in months. She talked about her father, about the accident, about the nightmares that had haunted her every night. She talked about how cold she had been, how scared, how alone. And she talked about how the humans' warmth had made all of that go away. Voss listened. She did not interrupt. She did not try to change the subject or minimize her daughter's pain. She simply listened, her fur shifting through colors of sadness and love and hope. When Tika finished, Voss reached out and took her daughter's paw in her own. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have done more. I should have found a way to help you." "You did help," Tika said. "You stayed. Last night. You stayed with us. That helped." Voss looked at the human who had made it all possible. Yuna was sipping her tea, pretending not to notice the emotional moment happening beside her. She was giving them privacy without leaving them alone. It was, Voss realized, a very human thing to do. "Thank you," Voss said quietly. Yuna looked up. "For what?" "For not pushing her away, for letting her stay. For..." Voss paused, searching for the right words. "For being warm," Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. "I didn't do anything special. I just fell asleep on the floor. And that," Voss said, "was everything." Later that day, Unji received a formal request from the Valori delegation. They wanted to extend their stay on the station. The reason cited was continued research into human thermal properties. Unji approved the request without hesitation, and in the observation lounge, a human engineer, a Valori commander, and a small cub with golden eyes watched the stars turn slowly outside the windows. They did not speak. They did not need to. Sometimes, words were not necessary. Sometimes, all you needed was warmth. Morning had come, but none of them were in a hurry to leave. The universe could wait. The work could wait. The endless demands of duty and responsibility and pride could wait. For now, they were warm. For now, they were together. For now, that was enough. And somewhere in the vast coldness of space, a small cub purred softly against a human's side and dreamed of nothing at all.